The grand ballroom of the Regency Hotel glittered with opulence that seemed almost too perfect. A polished stage for dreams and declarations. Crystal chandeliers scattered beams of light over the gleaming marble floor, and sumptuous floral arrangements punctuated every corner of the space. Tonight, every detail had been orchestrated to perfection for Linda's wedding, an event meant to symbolize hope, new beginnings, and the promise of enduring love. Yet beneath the shimmering surface, a darker melody of secrets and suspicion played quietly, known only to those who dared to listen. "Everything looks so beautiful tonight, doesn't it?" Linda murmured to her attendant as she paused at the entrance of the ballroom, her voice soft but carrying a trace of melancholy. Dressed in an ethereal ivory gown that flowed gracefully with each step, she exuded an elegance that belied the burdens of her past. Although the room sparkled with the promise of joy, her eyes betrayed a flicker of uncertainty, a hesitation born from memories of past betrayals. At the front row of the assembled guests sat a young boy, no more than 9 years old, whose intense, observant eyes absorbed every detail of the spectacle. This was Danny. Unlike the other children, who giggled and fidgeted with innocent delight, Danny sat in quiet contemplation. His small fingers toyed with the worn edges of a notebook he had clutched for weeks, a secret repository of observations that he had gathered in hushed moments and dim corridors. To anyone watching, his seriousness might have seemed out of place in an event so festive. Yet those who truly looked might have sensed the silent storm raging inside him. A nearby conversation among two well-dressed guests floated over the hum of the reception. "Linda has always been so trusting," one guest whispered, lowering his voice. "Indeed," replied the other, "but sometimes the brightest smiles hide the darkest secrets." Danny's ears picked up fragments of such murmurs. He had noticed, over the past several days, peculiarities that most would overlook. A hushed phone call behind closed doors, a furtive glance exchanged between Richard Collins and an unknown figure near the entrance. Though he was young, Danny's intuition had grown sharp. He had learned early that words often concealed more than they revealed, and that the spaces between conversation held their own truth. At the center of the unfolding drama was Richard Collins, standing with the poised confidence of a man accustomed to admiration. Richard wore a tailored suit that emphasized his sophisticated charm. His smile was practiced and warm, a smile that had won over many, including Linda. Yet as he glanced toward Linda's priceless heirlooms, a collection that testified to her family's rich legacy, a shadow of something unspoken passed over his face. "Linda, you look absolutely radiant tonight," Richard said smoothly as he approached her during a quiet moment near the reception table. His voice was low and measured, carefully modulated to impress. "Thank you, Richard," Linda replied, her tone polite yet tinged with reserve. "I have waited so long for today, for a new beginning." Richard's eyes gleamed as he leaned in slightly, lowering his voice conspiratorially. "And you deserve every moment of happiness, my dear," he said, his words dripping with charm that, to an untrained ear, promised devotion. Yet to Danny, who observed from afar, every syllable seemed laced with something cold and calculated. Meanwhile, on the outskirts of the merriment, Robert stood silently by the grand entrance. A man in his mid-40s with a weathered face and eyes that had seen too much. He had long been Linda's guardian and Danny's mentor. His experiences in law enforcement had taught him to trust his instincts. And tonight, his instincts were screaming that something was horribly amiss. "Robert," a well-dressed guest whispered as they passed him near the side of the room, "you always seem to notice things that others miss." Robert's response was measured and quiet. "Experience, I suppose. I've learned that appearances can be deceiving." The weight of those words seemed to hang in the air, mingling with the soft strains of the string quartet that began the ceremony. As the music swelled, Linda stepped onto the aisle, her eyes momentarily meeting Danny's. For an instant, An unspoken dialogue passed between mother and son, a silent conversation of shared hope and hidden worry. Linda's smile, though graceful, faltered ever so slightly, as if the moment had stirred memories she wished to keep buried. From his seat, Danny's heart pounded with a mix of fear and determination. He recalled, in vivid detail, the suspicious conversation he had overheard just days ago in a dim corridor behind the hotel's administrative offices. Richard's hushed words, "The legacy must be secured at all costs. I can't let anyone get in my way," had sent shivers down his spine. In his secret notebook, Danny had scribbled, almost feverishly, every detail. The notebook was filled with observations. Richard's tone when mentioning the family crest was different, almost greedy, and he paused, as if weighing something before answering Linda's simple question about her childhood. Later that evening, as the guests settled into their seats and the ceremony began, the atmosphere seemed to grow charged with an unspoken tension. The gentle notes of the quartet provided a fragile soundtrack to a day that was rapidly veering off its intended course. At one point during the intermission, while guests sipped champagne and exchanged pleasantries, Danny's gaze was fixed on a small cluster of individuals near the reception desk. There, he overheard Richard speaking into his phone in a tone that was far too low for such an open setting, confirming the details. "Yes, the assets will be secure once the contract is signed." His words, though barely audible, resonated in Danny's mind like a warning bell. Unable to contain his anxiety, Danny whispered to the seat beside him, where a kindly elderly woman sat. "Excuse me," he began hesitantly. "Have you ever felt that someone is hiding something, even when they seem so nice?" The woman, taken aback by the earnest question of a small boy, replied softly, "Sometimes, dear, people wear masks to hide their true intentions." Danny nodded gravely, his small face serious as if he carried the weight of the world in his eyes. Later, as Linda and Richard exchanged polite banter near a table adorned with flickering candles, Robert approached them with a subtle but piercing look. "Linda, may I have a word?" Robert said quietly, his voice low enough that only she could hear. Linda offered a tentative smile and followed him to a quiet corner. "What is it, Robert?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly with unspoken worry. "Sometimes," Robert began carefully, "the people who promise us the most seem to hide more than they reveal. I've noticed a few things tonight, little discrepancies that might be worth paying attention to." Linda's eyes widened, and she replied in a hushed tone, "I want to believe the best of everyone, but I suppose I should trust your judgment." Robert placed a reassuring hand on hers. "Just be cautious, Linda. Not every smile is sincere." Back at the front of the room, Danny's inner turmoil reached its peak. His mind raced with memories of those secret observations and the fragments of conversations he had collected like puzzle pieces. He recalled a particular moment, just hours earlier, when he had hidden behind a tall potted plant and listened as Richard's tone shifted imperceptibly. "The legacy is too important to risk," Richard had said, his voice laced with an undercurrent of greed that no one else had noticed. Danny's heart had clenched in that moment, and he had scribbled down every word with a shaking hand. Now, as the ceremony's soft music filled the air, and all eyes were fixed on Linda's graceful progress down the aisle, Danny's inner voice roared for him to act. His chest tightened with fear. Not the fear of speaking out in a room full of adults, but the fear of losing the one person he loved more than anything. And yet, beneath that fear burned a fierce, unyielding courage. "Mama," Danny whispered under his breath, his voice trembling with determination as he looked up at Linda from his seat. "I have to tell you something. I can't just sit here and do nothing." The thought was almost too heavy for his small frame, but the truth, raw and unfiltered, pushed him forward. Every heartbeat echoed with the resolve of a warrior. As the music swelled once more, and the guests prepared to witness the union that was meant to be the culmination of a day full of promise, Danny made a decision that would shatter the carefully constructed illusion of the evening. "Mom, please, listen to me," he muttered to himself, steeling his resolve. His fingers tightened around his little notebook and the small audio recorder, the tools that had borne witness to his clandestine investigations. Every line he had written, every overheard phrase had led him to this very moment. Unable to bear the mounting pressure of the secrets swirling around him, Danny's voice, small yet determined, finally broke through the ambient hum. "I have something to say," he called out, his words slicing through the gentle melody of the string quartet like a sudden, sharp chord. A ripple of shock spread through the ballroom. Conversations halted abruptly, and all eyes, some curious, some incredulous, turned toward the source of the unexpected outburst. Linda's smile faltered as her gaze met her son's, and the gentle warmth in her eyes was replaced by a dawning apprehension. "Danny, what are you doing?" Linda whispered, her voice both tender and alarmed as she hurried toward him. But Danny, his voice trembling yet resolute, stepped forward into the bright light of the ballroom. "Mom, I have to tell you something important," he said, his small hands gripping his notebook as if it were a shield against the world's deception. "Mr. Collins isn't who he says he is. I've heard him say things that prove he's only here for your money." A murmur of disbelief rippled among the guests. Richard's face, which had moments before been the picture of confident charm, drained of color. "That's absurd," he stuttered, trying to interject. "This is all a misunderstanding." But Danny pressed on, his voice gaining strength despite the tremor in his words. "No, listen," he insisted, looking directly into Richard's eyes as though daring him to refute the truth. "I heard you on the phone, right before you came over to talk to Mom. I heard you say the legacy must be protected at all costs. And then something about ensuring that everything remains just as it is. How can you say you love her if you're only here for her fortune?" The room fell into a heavy silence as guests exchanged stunned looks. Linda's eyes brimmed with tears, not only of sorrow but of the shock of betrayal. "Danny," she whispered, reaching out as if to comfort him. "Please, what do you mean?" Before he could answer, an elderly man in the audience muttered, "Is this really happening?" Another guest leaned over to his companion, murmuring, "I always thought something was off about him." Robert, who had been observing silently from the edge of the gathering, stepped forward with a firm, measured tone. "Enough," he declared. "We need to have a proper discussion about this." Turning to Linda, he spoke softly yet firmly. "Linda, I have long suspected that not everything here is as it seems. Please, trust your instincts." Linda, caught in the whirlwind of conflicting emotions, managed only a trembling, "Robert, what are you saying?" Richard's attempt to salvage his composure faltered further as he tried to interject. "This is preposterous." But Danny cut him off, his voice rising despite his youth. "No, I'm not finished," he insisted. "I've got the recorder right here, and I heard everything. I have notes too. And every single thing points to the fact that you're not here for love, but for the money. How could you do that to my mom?" A stunned silence enveloped the room as Richard's face twisted with anger and panic. "This is absurd," he repeated weakly, his voice barely a whisper. "You're just a child. You don't understand." But Danny's eyes blazed with a mixture of fear and determination. "Maybe I'm just a child," he said defiantly, "but I understand enough to know when someone is lying to the people they claim to love." Linda's face was a canvas of conflicting emotions. Tears slid silently down her cheeks as she stared at her son. A beacon of raw truth and vulnerable courage. "Danny, please," she pleaded softly, reaching out to him with trembling fingers. "Don't do this. You're hurting me." But Danny, though his voice cracked with emotion, continued. "I'm sorry, Mom. I have to. I won't let you be hurt by someone who only cares about what you have." A hush fell over the assembled guests, punctuated only by the distant strains of the quartet, now drowned out by the intensity of the confrontation. Robert's eyes narrowed as he surveyed the scene, his inner resolve hardening. "Everyone, please," he said, his tone brooking no argument. "Let us allow the boy to finish." His authoritative voice lent weight to Danny's words, and for a moment the cacophony of shocked whispers subsided into a tense expectancy. Richard, visibly rattled now, attempted once more to speak, his voice thick with a desperate plea. "Linda, you must believe me. Everything I've done was for you. I love you." Linda's voice, strained with both grief and a dawning clarity, replied, "Then why do you hide when I ask you about my family's history? Why do you speak in riddles about protecting a legacy?" Her words, heavy with betrayal, seemed to hang in the air as Richard's expression contorted with a mixture of anger and resignation. "Hey, I don't know what you're talking about," he finally stammered, his gaze shifting nervously as if searching for an escape. Danny's small voice rang out once again, stronger now. "I heard you, Mr. Collins. I heard you say, 'The treasure of this family is mine to guard, even if it means sacrificing true love.' How can someone who says they love you speak like that?" A murmur of shock rippled through the crowd. Some guests began to record the moment on their phones. Others exchanged worried glances. Their earlier excitement transformed into a somber, uncertain quiet. Linda's eyes met Danny's, and in that exchange a universe of unspoken truth passed between them. "My darling," she whispered, her voice trembling. I wish I had known. But you must listen, Mom," Danny said softly, reaching out for her hand. "Please, trust what you feel. I only want to protect you." Linda, torn between the love for her son and the dismay at the betrayal unfolding before her, could only nod in a silent, pained acceptance. Robert stepped forward then, his voice calm but resolute. "I believe the boy has spoken a truth that we can no longer ignore," he said firmly. He said firmly. "It is time that we look into this matter thoroughly." His words, measured and authoritative, lent the room a sense of impending justice. In that moment, the grand ballroom, a place that had once symbolized the promise of a perfect future, became the stage for a confrontation that would shatter illusions and expose hidden treachery. The tension in the room was palpable, every whispered comment and exchanged glance heavy with the knowledge that the facade of the evening was crumbling. As Danny stood, his small figure trembling yet unyielding at the center of the storm, the guests were forced to confront a truth that none of them had dared to acknowledge until now. "Please," Linda said softly, her voice cracking with both sorrow and newfound strength. "Let us not allow deceit to ruin this day entirely. I need time to think." Her words were met with a chorus of murmurs, some sympathetic, others skeptical, but none could deny the raw emotion that now filled the space. Richard's face, once so impeccably composed, now bore the unmistakable marks of a man caught in the glare of his own duplicity. "This isn't over," he managed to say in a strained tone, though his eyes betrayed his fear. "I promise you, Linda, everything will be explained in due time." But his words, intended to placate, only deepened the sense of foreboding that had descended upon the gathering. Danny's voice, though small, carried a power that belied his age. "I don't want any more lies," he declared, his eyes locking onto Richard's with a fierce intensity. "I want the truth, no matter how hard it is. In that moment, every soul in the room felt the weight of his words. They were not merely the declarations of a frightened child, but the cry of a heart that had already seen too much and refused to be fooled again. The music of the quartet faltered, as if in sympathy with the shattered dreams and unveiled truths. Guests sat frozen in their seats, caught between disbelief and a dawning realization that nothing would ever be the same again. Even the soft murmur of conversation seemed to pause, each person internalizing the gravity of what had just occurred. And so, as the lights of the ballroom glistened like scattered fragments of a broken promise, the first act of an unexpected reckoning had begun. In a moment of unparalleled courage, a small boy had dared to speak the truth. A truth that would set in motion events far beyond the confines of that glittering hall. The seeds of betrayal had been exposed, and the path ahead was uncertain, yet one thing was clear. The innocent could sometimes see more clearly than the jaded, and even the smallest voice might one day change the course of many lives. A heavy silence fell over the grand ballroom. In the wake of Danny's courageous declaration, the once celebratory music now seemed to hang in the air like a mournful elegy, and every shimmering detail of the opulent surroundings, every polished surface and flickering candle, appeared tainted by the truth that had been so boldly spoken. In that charged moment, the carefully constructed façade of the evening began to crumble. Richard Collins, whose confident composure had withered under the weight of the revelations, stood frozen as murmurs erupted from the assembled guests. His eyes darted frantically around the room, searching for any semblance of escape or redemption. "This is absurd! This is all a mistake!" he cried, his voice rising in panic. Yet his protests were swallowed by the rising tide of disbelief. At the same time, Robert's steady voice broke through the mounting chaos. "Enough," he declared in a firm tone that brooked no argument. He advanced toward Richard with deliberate steps, his gaze cold and unyielding. "Sire, you will come with me," he ordered, and two uniformed officers stepped forward from the fringes of the crowd. With measured precision, they moved in to escort Richard toward the exit. Linda, her heart shattered by the betrayal, and her mind racing with conflicting emotions, could barely register the scene before her. Tears blurred her vision as she struggled to reconcile the man she had once trusted with the evidence laid bare by her own son. "Richard, please, tell me this isn't true," she pleaded in a quavering voice, her hand outstretched as if to grasp a remnant of the love she once believed in. But Richard's eyes, now wide with fear and regret, offered no solace, only the cold reflection of his own duplicity. In the midst of the turmoil, Danny stood steadfast, his small frame trembling with a mixture of dread and fierce determination. He clutched his notebook and recorder like cherished armor, his wide eyes shining with unshed tears, yet filled with an undeniable resolve. Every detail of his earlier observations, the whispered conspiracies, the furtive glances, had led him to this moment, and he would not let fear silence his truth. "Mom," Danny whispered urgently as Linda's trembling hand reached for him. "I'm so sorry, but I had to do it. I had to tell you, because I love you." Linda knelt and wrapped her arms around her son, her voice breaking as she murmured, "Oh, my brave boy. I wish it hadn't come to this. But I see now that your heart was right all along." Nearby, Robert pulled Linda aside into a quieter alcove away from prying eyes. His tone was gentle yet laced with unyielding firmness. "Linda, I know this is painful, but you deserve the truth. And now that it's out, we must ensure that you are safe and that your family's legacy is protected." Linda's eyes glistened with a mixture of sorrow and newfound resolve. "I trusted him, Robert. I trusted his every word," she confessed in a hushed tone, the memory of whispered promises and tender caresses now poisoned by deceit. Robert placed a reassuring hand on hers. Sometimes the ones who promise the most hide the darkest intentions. But you, Linda, you have the strength to overcome this. As the officers led Richard away, the murmurs of the guests transformed into heated whispers and speculative conversations. One guest, a distinguished older man in a tailored suit, leaned over to his companion and remarked, "I always sensed something was amiss with him. His eyes, they never quite met yours, Linda." Another guest added, "This must be a lesson. Never let the glimmer of wealth blind you to the truth of a person's soul." Back on the polished marble floor, the atmosphere began to shift from shock to a cautious semblance of order. The string quartet, having paused momentarily in respect for the gravity of the moment, resumed playing a slower, more somber melody, a soundtrack to the unfolding reckoning. Linda, though still reeling from the betrayal, summoned the strength to address the gathered crowd. Her voice, though wavering, carried an unexpected clarity. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, pausing to steady her breathing, "I stand before you not as a victim, but as a woman who has learned the painful cost of misplaced trust. Today a truth has been revealed, one that I wish I had known sooner. But I also know that in our darkest moments, we have the opportunity to rebuild and rediscover what is truly valuable." Her words, soft yet resolute, rippled through the room. In the eyes of the guests, a mixture of sympathy and admiration began to replace the earlier shock. Linda continued, "I thank my son, Danny, for his courage, his willingness to speak when silence would have meant destruction, and I thank Robert for his unwavering support. Together, we will move forward from this betrayal stronger and more determined than ever." In the midst of the gathering, a well-dressed woman approached Linda, offering a comforting smile and gentle words. "Linda, I'm so sorry you had to endure this," she said, placing a reassuring hand on Linda's arm. "But know that you are not alone. We stand with you, and we believe in the strength of your spirit." Linda managed a small, grateful smile. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice imbued with both sorrow and the quiet promise of healing. Meanwhile, Danny, still standing near the center of the room, felt a mingling of relief and residual terror. The initial shock of his public declaration had given way to a sense of vindication. Yet, he also understood the enormity of what had just occurred. His mind raced with the recollections of every whispered secret, every hidden glance he had noted in his little notebook. In his heart, he knew that this day, however painful, was the beginning of a necessary transformation. A transformation that would reclaim the dignity of his family and the purity of his mother's heart. Later that evening, as the police completed their preliminary inquiries and the guests began to disperse with quiet, reflective expressions, Robert gathered Linda and Danny in a secluded corner of the now somber ballroom. The soft murmur of voices and the fading strains of the quartet served as a gentle backdrop to their private conversation. "Linda," Robert began, his voice steady and sincere, "this is not the end. It is merely the beginning of a new chapter. We must take the necessary steps to ensure that your legacy is preserved, free from the stain of deceit." Linda, her eyes still red from tears, nodded slowly. I don't know where to start," she admitted. "Everything I believed in, every promise of love, feels shattered." Robert reached out and squeezed her hand gently. "Sometimes the most painful truths lead us to the path of redemption. Trust in yourself, and trust in the love that you have for those around you. We will rebuild, one step at a time." Danny, his small face still set in a determined expression, added softly, "You'll always be here, Mom. I'll protect you, no matter what." Linda wrapped her arms around him, her voice filled with tender resolve. "You have done more than protect me, my darling. You have given me the strength to see clearly, and for that I am forever grateful." Outside the ballroom, under a sky that had begun to clear after the storm of revelations, the promise of a new dawn beckoned. The bitter taste of betrayal would linger for a while, but the seeds of hope had been sown that night. In that quiet, reflective space, Linda resolved to reclaim her life on her own terms, to transform the pain of deception into the catalyst for a brighter, more authentic future. In the days that followed the tumultuous wedding, the scandal spread through the community like wildfire. Media outlets carried the headline, "Wedding of Deceit. How a Child's Courage Unmasked a Con Man." And while many buzzed with sensational headlines, Linda found solace in the quiet support of her close friends, family, and trusted advisors. One crisp morning, Linda sat in her modest study, a room filled with heirloom photographs, letters, and mementos that chronicled her family's storied past. The early sunlight filtered through lace curtains, casting delicate patterns upon the desk where she now wrote. Her pen moved slowly across the paper as she documented her thoughts, her grief, and her resolve to begin anew. "Every ending," she wrote, "is also a beginning. Today I cast aside the shadows of betrayal and embrace the light of truth." Her words, though penned in solitude, carried the echo of a promise to herself. A promise that she would never again allow deception to dim the radiance of her spirit. Later that week, Linda met with Robert and Danny at a small, charming cafe nestled on a quiet street. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the soft hum of conversations, creating a haven of warmth and normalcy that contrasted sharply with the turbulent memories of the past. Over steaming mugs, the trio engaged in heartfelt dialogue, a conversation that would lay the foundation for their future. "Linda, I've been in contact with legal experts and financial advisors," Robert explained as he unfolded a neatly arranged folder on the table. "We will ensure that your assets are protected and that any attempt to reclaim or misuse your legacy is thwarted." Linda listened intently, her eyes glistening with gratitude and relief. "I can't thank you enough, Robert. Your vigilance has saved me from a fate I never imagined." Danny, sitting between them, piped up with youthful sincerity. "And I promise to always look out for you, Mom. I'll keep my eyes open, no matter how many secrets people try to hide." A gentle smile tugged at Linda's lips as she reached across the table to squeeze Danny's hand. "You're my little hero, and I'm so proud of you." In the weeks that followed, the healing process unfolded slowly but steadily. Linda immersed herself in community work, sharing her story with those who had suffered similar betrayals. She organized small support groups, speaking at gatherings with a soft yet powerful voice that resonated with truth and resilience. Her experience, once a source of shame and sorrow, had become a beacon of hope for others. At one such gathering, Linda addressed a room of attentive faces. "It is easy to be blinded by promises of wealth and happiness," she said, her voice clear and unwavering. "But true happiness is built on trust, honesty, and the courage to stand by those you love. I have learned that even in our darkest moments, the smallest voice, like that of my son, can light the way to a new beginning." Meanwhile, Danny continued to blossom both at school and within the community. His courageous act had earned him accolades from teachers and admiration from peers. In art class, he was encouraged to illustrate the events of that fateful day, a series of sketches that captured not only the dramatic confrontation in the ballroom, but also the quiet moments of bravery that had defined his inner world. His drawings, filled with vivid imagery and raw emotion, became a symbol of hope, a reminder that even in the midst of chaos, the light of truth shines brightly. One warm afternoon, as spring began to reclaim the landscapes of their town, Linda, Danny, and Robert took a leisurely walk through a nearby park. Cherry blossoms danced in the gentle breeze, and the laughter of children playing filled the air. A stark, uplifting contrast to the dark memories of months past. They found a quiet bench beneath a blossoming tree, and as they sat together, the bonds of their shared journey grew ever stronger. "Look at these blossoms," Linda remarked softly, gazing at the delicate petals scattered on the path. "They remind me that beauty often arises after a long, harsh winter." Robert nodded, his eyes reflecting the wisdom of his years. "Indeed, and just as these trees shed their leaves to prepare for new growth, sometimes we must let go of the old to make way for a better future." Danny, who had been quietly watching a group of children chasing bubbles, turned to his mother with a sincere smile. "I'm glad we're together, Ma. I know things have been really hard, but I think we're going to be okay." Linda wrapped her arms around him, her voice filled with both tenderness and determination. "Yes, my dear. We will be okay, because we have each other, and because we have learned the importance of truth, trust, and love." As the day drew to a close, Linda felt a profound sense of renewal. The betrayal that had once threatened to shatter her world had, paradoxically, paved the way for a rebirth of her spirit. With Robert's steadfast guidance and Danny's unyielding courage, she embraced the promise of a future built not on fragile illusions, but on the enduring strength of authenticity and love. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in hues of orange and purple, Linda sat on her back porch with Danny and Robert. The gentle chirping of crickets and the soft rustle of leaves provided a serene symphony to their quiet reflections. "Tonight, I feel like I'm finally free," Linda confessed, her eyes fixed on the fading light. "Free from the lies, free from the betrayal. I can see clearly now what truly matters." Robert, his gaze warm and reassuring, replied, "You have always been strong, Linda. Sometimes it takes a great challenge to reveal the true strength within us." Danny snuggled close to his mother and added, "I'll always protect you, Mom, and I'll always be here to remind you that you're amazing." Linda smiled through tears of gratitude. "Thank you, both of you. I couldn't have done this without you. We've learned so much about trust, about love, and about the power of speaking our truth. I promise you, from this day forward, we will build our future on honesty and hope." In that moment, as the cool night embraced them and the stars began to twinkle overhead, the wounds of the past began to heal. The painful echoes of deception were gradually replaced by the gentle reassurance of new beginning. Linda, Danny, and Robert knew that the road ahead might still have its challenges, but together they had forged an unbreakable bond, a bond rooted in the unyielding power of truth and the promise of tomorrow. Epilogue. A brighter tomorrow. Months later, the scandal that had once rocked the community had faded into a distant memory, replaced by whispers of admiration for the courage of a little boy and the resilience of a woman who had turned betrayal into a beacon of hope. Linda's story became a symbol of empowerment, a reminder that even when deception casts its long shadow, the light of truth, nurtured by love and steadfast support, can lead to redemption. At a community event organized in honor of those who had overcome hardship, Linda addressed a small gathering of friends, supporters, and newly inspired souls. "Today, I stand before you not as someone broken by betrayal, but as a woman reborn," she said, her voice steady and imbued with quiet strength. "I have learned that the true treasures in life are not measured by wealth or possessions, but by the integrity of our hearts and the bonds we share with those we love." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd, and in that moment, Linda's eyes met Danny's, a look of mutual understanding and unspoken gratitude. that spoke volumes of the journey they had traversed together. Nearby, Robert stood with quiet pride, his eyes shining with the satisfaction of having guided them through the darkest of times. As the celebration continued into the warm evening, children played under twinkling lights and adults engaged in heartfelt conversations about resilience, hope, and the power of community. Linda's foundation, established in the wake of the tumultuous events, had begun to offer support to others who had faced similar betrayals, and her story inspired many to reclaim their own lives with honesty and courage. One crisp evening, as the trio strolled through the park where cherry blossoms had once heralded their newfound hope, Linda paused to take in the beauty of the scene. "These trees remind me that after every winter comes spring," she said softly. "No matter how harsh the cold, life always finds a way to bloom again." Danny, now a little older but still carrying the unmistakable spark of that brave child, looked up at his mother and said, "I'll always remember that moment, Mom, when I realized that even if I'm small, my voice matters." Robert, his voice low and thoughtful, added, "And that is a lesson we all must learn, that sometimes the smallest voices carry the greatest truths." In the golden glow of the setting sun, the family embraced the promise of a future built on trust, love, and the courage to speak out against deception. Their journey had not been easy, and scars remained as gentle reminders of the past. But these scars were now the marks of survival and the seeds of strength. Linda's life, once overshadowed by the threat of greed and betrayal, had transformed into a tapestry of resilience and hope. The painful events of that fateful day had paved the way for genuine connections and the realization that the true treasures of life were found not in material wealth, but in the bonds of family, friendship, and the unwavering commitment to truth. As they returned to their modest home, now a sanctuary of warmth and honest living, the night sky sparkled with countless stars. Linda sat on her porch with Danny on her lap and Robert by her side. With a contented sigh, she whispered, "Thank you, my loves, for showing me that even in our darkest hours, the light of truth can lead us to a brighter tomorrow." Danny, his eyes reflecting the starlight and the wisdom beyond his years, replied softly, "I promise to always be here, Mom. Together we will make sure that our family's story is one of love, courage, and endless hope." Robert smiled, his gaze fixed on the horizon where the first hints of dawn began to appear. "And that, my dear friends, is the greatest victory of all, the victory of truth, love, and the unbreakable bonds that unite us." With that, the trio sat in a peaceful silence, their hearts filled with gratitude for the journey they had endured and the promise of a future where honesty reigned supreme. The scars of betrayal had faded into the background, replaced by a radiant tapestry of hope, resilience, and the enduring power of a family's love. In the end, the unmasked truth was not merely a tale of deception and downfall. It was a celebration of the human spirit's capacity to overcome even the darkest of betrayals. Through the eyes of a courageous child, the heart of a resilient woman, and the steadfast guidance of a devoted guardian, the story reminds us that truth, no matter how quietly it is whispered, can illuminate the path to a brighter, more authentic tomorrow. Do we?